G'day, welcome to the Financial Bloke podcast, the podcast for people seeking the wisdom needed to grow their family's wealth and live a happier, healthier and more prosperous life. My name's Ben Law and I am the Financial Bloke. Many years ago, I learned that if you want to be successful, you should find successful people and listen carefully to what they have to say. As the old saying goes, success leaves clues. Now, in this week's episode of the Financial Bloke podcast, I have retired beef exporter Mr. Richard Rains. Prior to his retirement, Richard was a major shareholder of Sanger Australia, one of Australia's largest meat exporters. He's most well known for convincing fast food giant McDonald's to include imported Australian beef in their US restaurants, which had never happened before. McDonald's has since become Australia's single largest beef customer. Richard's a strong supporter of the red meat industry and has strong opinions on fake meat, the need for greater branding of Australian beef, and how the industry should act in response to animal activists and environmentalists. Since retiring, Richard has served on several boards, but his main passion is developing and mentoring young people coming through the industry. He's integrally involved in a number of mentoring programs, including the Xander McDonald Awards. Richard's a humble man and he won't blow his own trumpet, but in anyone's measure he was hugely successful in his business career and still has the energy and enthusiasm of someone half his age. I want to know what his secret to success was, and today we're going to find out. So without further delay, let's get cracking. Welcome, Richard.
Wonderful to be here, Ben.
Now, Richard, just to kick things off, can you give me a bit of a short background on your story to give us some context?
Sorry, Ben, it's a rather long story, but I'll make it as brief as I can. So grew up on a mixed farm in central west New South Wales, youngest of four, most fortunate to be sent off to Sydney to boarding school for 6 years, which was a bit of a shock to the system, Ben. There were 13 students in my primary school where I went. There were two of us in sixth class. So to go from a school like that to a boarding school in Sydney of 1,200 kids took me many years to get into stride in Sydney, and I was absolutely lost. We'd had a very protected, sheltered youth, I guess. And anyway, finished my last HSC exam, rang home and said, Beauty, exams are over. I'm on my way home to the farm. And I vividly remember my father's sage words of advice saying, wheel up a minute, things are a bit tough back here. We've got low income, low prices, high interest rates, drought, all those typical things in the bush at times. And he said, please try your hand at a career in Sydney. And most importantly, he said, if all else fails, you can always come home to the farm. And Ben, I've never forgotten that. That gave me the safety blanket that I needed. That stuck with me. Look, I had never dreamt in my wildest dreams that I would ever sit at a desk for a career, but it's amazing what you can achieve when you give it a go. I did a couple of other things before I finally found my passion in agriculture. I knew that's where I wanted to be because that's what the blood that was running through my veins was agriculture. I eventually got a cadetship with a company by the name of Dalgety, which was an English-based wool firm, as they called them in those days, very similar to an Elders today. They had an export division with one individual exporting grain, one doing skins and hides, one doing meat, but no overarching person if one was sick or holidays or travel. So I had an 18-month traineeship in the field in all those three facets. That came back into head office in Sydney and said, here I am, who needs help? The fellow in the skins desk said, yes, I need help. So I was with him for a day. He said, good, I'm up to date. I said, who wants help? The bloke on the meat desk said, I need help. So I went to the meat desk, and Ben, I didn't ever leave it. I didn't ever have a day on the grain desk. I didn't ever go back to the skins desk. I really struck a chord with the fellow on the meat desk and spent the rest of my days on the meat desk at Dalgety. I can't remember the reason or the details, Ben, but an opportunity came up in South Korea. The government there determined that they wanted to import meat for the very first time, and I was successful in selling them a small quantity of meat, 500 tonne of what we call bone-in quarter beef, which I acquired from the Newcastle abattoir. It's no longer there, unfortunately, but sent 500 tonne to Korea that year, which was the first meat, as I say, that they ever imported. And it quickly went on to become Australia's third largest export market for beef, which it's still in that vicinity today. So it quickly became a very, very, very important market for Australia. I got headhunted from Dalgety, Ben. It was a very large company where I felt I was a number on a payroll list. I was the sort of kid that needed a kick in the backside if I was doing wrong, or needed a pat on the back if I'd done right. And I wasn't getting either. And that wasn't really my style. So I got poached by a meat trading company by the name of Sanger, who also had their office in Sydney. Head office was in London, 14 offices around the world. And I shone under their culture, Ben, carried on the Korean business. I had 14 trips up there as a 22-year-old, I think, to Korea. I was up there every month for every tender, and once I had to go twice. So as a young fella to be paddling in those circles, South Korea was quite a different country in those days. You could drive any coloured car you wanted up there, Ben, so long as it was black. It was quite a strange regime, but it worked. We found a way to maintain an enormous share of that business, and it was just fabulous for me, fabulous for the business, fabulous for the country. So that was a very steep learning curve for a young fella in those days, Ben, back in the mid-1970s.
That's the best learning curve, though, isn't it?
It was the best learning curve. So I spent the next 37 years of my life with that organisation, Ben, with Sanger. I was fortunate enough to be asked to go to head office in London in 1978. To have a year over there and cross-pollinate and see what we could all do together, which was a wonderful experience for me. But halfway through my tenure there, the chairman asked me if I would go on and have a year in every Sanger office around the world, which would have been just the most extraordinary experience for a naive little bush kid. Sadly, for various reasons, the business started to get into trouble, the Sanger group. The chairman suggested to me that perhaps it would be best if I wasn't there in the middle of the mess. So I came back to Australia. The business went broke, was liquidated in 1980. And a gentleman by the name of John Cooper that was managing the Australian operation purchased both the Australian office and the French office back from the liquidator. That was 1980. He gave me an opportunity to acquire equity in the business from that day, which was quite a stretch. You know, the parent company had just gone broke. What was the outlook for our business? But that was an opportunity too good for me to refuse, Ben. So I grasped that nettle, took on that opportunity. And at that stage, the business had an annual turnover of $50 million. When I was the recipient of a management buyout of the organisation in 2013, we had a revenue of $500 million. So, Ben, if I could digress 1 second, I wear as a little badge of honour at my retirement dinner. One of my key executives made a speech in my honour, and he said, in 37 years in this organisation, Richard has done absolutely zero. And I thought, how's this going? He said, when Richard joined the business, it had a revenue of 50. Today it's got a revenue of 500. So all he did was put a zero on the end. So, it sounds pretty easy, but in reality, there was a lot of hard work went into it. But it was just a great fun ride to get there, Ben. I've never forgotten my country roots. Agriculture has been incredibly generous to me. I still pinch myself every morning when I get up to think of the successes that we've had along the way. So it's been an extraordinary journey. I've loved every bit of it.
Fantastic. And there's still plenty of years to come left, I dare say so. And look, just for everyone listening, that's a very short synopsis of a very long career. There's a lot of other really good things in there, which we might manage to touch on as we go through today. So where I'd like to head first, Richard, is you're really passionate about ag, and your way of giving back, I suppose we should say, is been serving on industry boards and committees. But it's the time that you invest in mentoring the next generation is what I greatly admire about you. And I think society would be a lot better off if more of the baby boomer generation followed your lead, as young people are really crying out for encouragement and guidance. I see that all the time. Now, I'd like to start here, if that's okay with you, is my guess is, as a retired financial advisor, I'm guessing that you would be financially secure. And so today's episode is brought to you by AgriCoach. You've worked bloody hard over the years and you've built a solid operation. But as your children grow up and start their own journeys, you're beginning to think about the next 5, 10, and even 15 years and how to keep driving the business forward and ensure a smooth and successful succession plan. Preparing the business, preparing the next generation, and preparing for your eventual retirement all requires a solid plan and a proven process. Unsure about the right steps to take? Head on over to agricoach.com.au/webinar to learn more about our Succession Proof Your Family webinar. AgriCoach, aligning families, growing wealth, and protecting legacies. And now, let's get back to the episode. The first question that popped into my head is, well, why the hell didn't you just sell your company, invest wisely, and sail off into the retirement sunset? Why did you decide to take on these mentoring type activities? Because it's obviously an unpaid gig and requires a lot of your time. Like, why have you gone down that path?
Correct on all counts, Ben. But when I retired, I did buy a boat and sail off into the sunset. I think it was one of the best things that I've done. Retirement's a funny thing. I can't believe the number of people that are seriously nervous about retirement and won't retire because they don't know what they're going to do. Ben, I've had some amazing chapters in my life, but can I say that retirement is by far and away the best chapter that I have had. I think the word that I like to describe my retirement is freedom. For all the years that I employed not a lot of people, but quite a few people, we had 30 or 40 staff, but it was their families that I felt responsible for as well, Ben. I thought that if ever I stubbed my toe and business was no more, that would affect not just my staff, but their families. So it would affect a lot of people. So I carried a lot of responsibility on my shoulders, be that right, wrong, or otherwise. That's just the way I was. So I was always very cautious, very careful not to do anything that might end a good thing. So I got an opportunity to exit my business at the age of 58, which I did in 2013. So I was still young enough, had enough energy, had enough desire to keep on and do other things. So I sat on a couple of boards for a little time, Ben, and really enjoyed that. I think one of the good things about mentoring, and I've had plenty of experiences and I'm more than happy to share those, but I can really do it at a time that's convenient to me, Ben. You know, I don't have too many time constraints when I've got to do my mentoring. That's something that I work out between my mentee and myself when it works with them. One of the things in that regard that I'm probably most proud of, Ben, is to chair the Xander McDonald Award. I've been doing that for 7 or 8 years now. Xander, for those who don't know, his family were arguably the largest family cattle producers in the country, based up at between Cloncurry and Mount Isa in North Queensland. Xander was driving the business, and sadly he fell off a windmill on their property in April 2013 at the age of 41 and died from his injuries. But I often reflect, Ben, for a man to have created what he had by the age of 41 and to be at a point where an award is established in your honour, and you're only 41. You have got to have done a lot and touched a lot of lives to receive such a claim. And that was Xander McDonald. He was a most extraordinary man. He was a great researcher, a very deep thinker, a very driven man. But I think one of the most important things about Xander was that he shared his findings and his enthusiasm with a lot of youth. He really wanted to give people a leg up. And I've probably taken a leaf out of that book and tried to emulate him in some regard to also try and help other people get on in their careers. So the Xander McDonald Award is each year we have a recipient in Australia and a recipient in New Zealand, 21 to 36-year-old, employed and living in Australia and or New Zealand. And it is a mentoring program where we introduce them to people who have been there, done that, so they can get those inspirational stories. The mentoring package is tailored, Ben, where we take the award recipient to people around the country. We get the use of a Pilatus aircraft, which can take us to places that would otherwise take us a whole lot longer to get to. It's just the most extraordinary thing. But Ben, the thing I want to highlight there, it's not just the award recipients that gain an enormous amount from the whole award, but the mentoring trip. But the mentors that we visit just can't do enough to help young people. I don't know whether it's an agriculture thing or whether it's across the board, but I have not yet found a CEO or a managing director or a company owner who didn't want to share everything with these young people that we take around. It's the most fantastic experience. And one of the highlights for mentoring for me, Ben, is I think we all continue to learn forever. We never get to a point where we know it all. And going on these mentoring trips with these young people, I learn just as much as what the young mentees learn, Ben. So it's a two-way street. And I think the mentors, all the mentors that we go and see, they're learning all the time as well. So it's just to be able to put some wind under some young people's wings and hopefully, take their careers to the next level, Ben, is something that I get great joy out of. So, yes, I could have kept on sailing into the sunset. I did that for a little while. But, Ben, I think whatever success I might have had in my career, a lot of it was because I met people or connected with people who were able to help me. I don't think the word mentor existed when I was a young fella starting out in business, but there was an enormous number of wonderful, wise people who gave me encouragement and helped me along the way. Then a couple of things. I think because Dad had given me that safety blanket to go home if everything else had failed, I think that gave me a bit more encouragement. I was prepared to walk through doors, not knowing what was on the other side, whereas I think quite a few people were a bit too nervous to walk through that door because they were afraid of what was on the other side. But I raced through that door headlong and tackled everything I could find and just soaked it all up and gave it a go. But Ben, before I forget, the other thing that I think that is important about being a mentee is being vulnerable and being open to be told.
Or challenged.
Challenged, yes, but there's a lot of young people out there, Ben, who are know-alls. They think they know it all. And I can tell you as a mentor, if I find a young person who knows it all and has got the guard up and doesn't want to listen, well, I'm not going to tell. So I think they've got to be vulnerable. They've got to be hungry to learn. They've got to want to listen, and they've got to ask the right questions, press the right buttons to get the answers that they want that will help them in their career. So don't pretend that you know it all. Please be vulnerable, ask the right questions, and be open to suggestions and criticism and advice and all those things. Don't take it the wrong way. Just keep on asking the questions. It's terribly important, in my opinion.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Mentors were really important to me in my career. I still have them today. But I remember when I started my financial advice practice, I actively sought out people that I could learn from. And so, in inverted commas, mentor. And a lot of the people that I approached weren't people that were necessarily in the spotlight, but they were good valued people that had done well quietly and humbly. And my goal as the younger person, the mentee, was to look for someone and say, this isn't just a one-way street. How can I get them to mentor me over time? But along the way, how can I add value to their lives to be able to make it a win-win scenario? And I remember I have a gentleman I always called Uncle David. He was far more successful than me in the financial advice space. He was very, very good at what he did. He didn't want to be a mentor. So I spent probably 2 or 3 years just adding value to his world, and we've become very good friends now. He's retired. He was instrumental in much of my success. And I remember he said to me 6 months ago, he said, Ben, he says, what I came to realize is I learned just as much off you as you did off me. And in the end of the day, he says the teacher became the student in some cases, because I had skills in area he didn't. He had skills in areas I didn't. And I was very humble about what I did. But my whole goal was to add value, add value, add value, add value. And that worked out really well in the end.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. So, Ben, the Xana McDonald Award is, I chair that today. I love it. It does it for me. I've been involved in a couple of other formal mentoring groups. One was Graham Acton Beef Connections program, which is comes under the Beef Australia umbrella. It's a wonderful, wonderful program helping young people. The other one that I've been involved in, Ben, which at the moment is Queensland specific, but it's called Advanced Beef Leaders. It's a Queensland government initiative, which the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries run. I had a year with it too. They're probably more formalised arrangements, if you like. And then, again, through my award, some of those people who aren't finalists or aren't recipients in the award are keen for some mentoring. And even though they haven't made it through to the finalist stage, I still spend quite a bit of time with a number of them. So we can all find the time to pick up a phone and speak with young people and give them a hand. And if that makes agriculture a better place at the end of the day, well, that's good for everybody, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Now, I think it was Tony Robbins was the guy who said success leaves clues. And to be frank, you were obviously very successful in your field, and anyone with half a brain would want to know why and learn from that. And so I'd like to dig briefly into when you became the owner of Sanger, when you said you took that opportunity and you went from being an employee to owning a part of the company yourself. And that seems like a pretty big turning point. So I suppose my specific question is, why did you decide to take the risk and ultimately back yourself?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ben. I think because I had people around me who had confidence in me and told me that I should give it a crack. And I saw an opportunity that I couldn't refuse. So when John Cooper, who's become a father figure to me, he's just a wonderful man. He's well into his 80s now, but he's a lovely, lovely man, and he's always kept an eye out for me. And he could probably see something in me which gave me the opportunities. But he gave me the opportunity to buy equity in the company on day one back in 1980. Now, I didn't have a cent to my name, so I couldn't have afforded to pay up front. But John and I came with an arrangement where I could pay for the equity in arrears, and so that whatever dividend I could attract, that was his money, but I got the shares, and that carried on through till 2000, Ben, when I ended up with the majority of the equity in the business, and John retired, but stayed on very, very much as a strong mentor for me. He wasn't officially chairman of the business, but he might as well have been, because he was the circuit breaker. So I had a junior partner who we worked together for 27 years and had a wonderful partnership. Ben, a partnership was something that I was probably always somewhat nervous of, but thankfully he and I had very different interests in the business. He was more interested in the numbers and the nuts and bolts and the systems and all those things, where I was probably more interested in the relationships with our suppliers and our customers and our bankers and everybody in the system. So we had separate focuses, and we worked so well together. It created a really successful business. We had a board meeting probably 3 days a week where we'd go and have a sandwich and a coffee at the cafe over the road from the office, and that gave us a chance to get away from the phone and the email and talk things through. And it just created a really successful business, I think, Ben. So I acquired the majority of the business in 2000, and we continued to grow the business substantially. And then the fellow who I'd been with for 27 years, he put a proposal to me to acquire my equity, which I accepted in 2013, and I did sail off into the sunset, as I say, and he took the business on from there, Ben. Okay,
so you had good quality people surrounding you and supporting you that essentially gave you that strength of character to be able to say, you know what, I need to back myself. So my question is, What did they see in you? Because that doesn't happen very often. What did they see in Richard Rains that they wouldn't have seen in someone else? Because that's a big leap of faith to give a share of a company. On how old were you then? Sorry, how old were you?
Born in 55, so that was 1980. So what's that? Not very old. So what was I, 25?
Yeah. So what was in it? What value did you add for them to do that?
Ben, I guess a steady set of hands for starters. I would like to think that there are quite a few keys to whatever success I might have enjoyed. But the first one I always say is that, firstly, I employed people who were smarter than me. I found that very easy to do. But I find it extraordinary how many people are scared of doing that because they think that somebody one day will take their job. Well, I was hopeful that somebody one day would take my job, and that's what happened.
And you got to focus on doing what you were good at as well. Like if you brought someone on smarter than you, they could deal with areas that they were really good at, and you could focus on your relationship, sales, whatever it might be.
Absolutely, Ben. And for every new trader that I brought into my business, I would put them on a 12-month traineeship where I put them in my accounts department for a few months so they could understand what foreign currency was and what a site draft was and a letter of credit, all those accounting things that we had to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And then I would put them in an abattoir for a few weeks or maybe just a week because it was unlikely that they would be able to pick up a sharp knife or do any of those things. But at least they could get the mood of the abattoir and work out what happened and so on. And so then I would bring them back and maybe put them in my logistics department for a few months so they could understand picking up an empty container, taking it to the abattoir, getting it packed, bringing it back and making sure it went to the right wharf and ended up in the right destination around the world. So by the time they came onto the trading desk, Ben, they had quite a broad knowledge of what made the business tick. And as I said to them, most of them were university leavers. And as I said to them, you've got to get this education now because you won't get it in 5 years' time. And if you don't get that education, you will always be lacking in what you do. You know, once they'd finished their university degree, Ben, they thought they knew it all. But I convinced them to take this extra year or so to get the additional training. And they were all very grateful that they got it at the end of the day. So I was very fortunate to be able to employ all university graduates. I wasn't a university graduate myself. It was quite unusual to go to university, and I left school in 72. So I couldn't have gone to university anyway. Then I didn't get a sufficient graduation mark, but that's another story. It wasn't a requirement in those days, and it wasn't a requirement later on, but there was such a great availability of graduates that a graduate told me a few things, Ben. Firstly, they had a certain level of intelligence, which was important. They had a certain level of maturity that, they'd been at university for most likely 4 or 5 years. So they'd got, a little bit of that nonsense out of their system, and they now had an understanding that where they wanted to get to. So, there were a lot of things about university graduates. And I didn't lose one, Ben. I don't know how it happened because it's not an easy thing just to interview somebody for an hour and then if they were good, maybe get them back for a second hour. But we didn't have a failure in employing young people. And I'd just like to give you one example. There was a terrific young fellow came to me by the name of Alistair Ferguson and applied for a role as a trader. He'd grown up on a farm west of Rockhampton, went to Orange Ag College, and he came to me and he said, Richard, I'd love a job, but he said, I want to tell you I'm passionate about organics. And he said, because I think that that's the future of the world. And if you'll give me a gig, that's where I'd like to get to eventually. So I didn't know much about organics in those days, Ben, but he was so passionate about what he wanted to do that I couldn't not employ him. So I put him through the same 12-month traineeship and then put him on my trading desk. And he hounded and hounded and hounded me. He said, Richard, can I start this organic? I said, whoa, wait a minute, you're not quite ready yet, until he just drove me crazy. So we set up that opportunity for him. He took ownership of this organic business, Ben. Today it's called Arcadian Organic and Natural Meat Company. He has recently retired from the business himself, and it's been taken over by others, but it would today arguably be Australia's and probably the world's largest organic beef and lamb processor, where they buy the livestock from the producer, process them, and find the market for them around the world. But that's fairly typical of what happened in our organisation, that we took people on with a passion for doing something and let them do it, Ben. Then they had ownership of it and away they went, and it just had great success. It enthused the staff. They got excited by it. They wanted to be there. I'm a great believer, Ben, that you've got to want to get out of bed in the morning and go and do what you're going to do. If you've got to drag yourself, oh, don't tell me I've got to go back to work again, but our blokes, people were all excited about what they were doing. It was a fun place to be. And in the end, all I did, Ben, was make sure that the system was there for these people to operate within. So, we had good banking facilities, we had good insurance, we had the, good logistics arrangements, so that the traders didn't have to worry about those things. We were very well funded. No trader ever said to me, Richard, I've got an opportunity to buy X tons of meat, can we afford it? They just knew that whatever deal they could do, it was okay to be done. And that was a great privilege, and not every trading company like Sanger enjoyed that same situation, Ben.
That's a fantastic story. And I think a couple of things resonated there for me is I went through university, and I remember when I got out of university, I was pretty driven. My mum used to always say, you've got your ambitions mixed up with your capabilities, Benjamin. And she was always right. And I think when I went to London, that was a prime example. But one of the things that I really am grateful for looking back in hindsight, and I'm 45 now, is when I started in financial advice, when I finally found my way there, is I started at the bottom and worked my way up. And I was answering the phones, filling out paperwork. I was doing stuff that just bored me to tears. It just wasn't for me. But when I started my own business from the scratch and built the systems, the processes, and worked for my clients, I understood every aspect of the business because I'd done every job. So when I had people come and work for me and I built my team, I could hand on heart say, I've done your job. I know what's involved. I either can call the bullshit on it, what can and can't be done, or I can support you and say, I understand how challenging this is, and let me make this easier for you, and let's all work as a team. So I think that apprenticeship's really important. And if I look at a lot of young kids today, a little bit of advice I'd give them is to make sure you do your apprenticeship, like learn the basics, because if you can't learn the basics, you can't run the company. Because you see, and I was the same when I was 22, just getting out of uni, is you come out and you think, wow, I'd like to be the CEO of Sanger next week. I've done 3 months on the couple of days in the abattoir, a couple of days back in the office. Why aren't I CEO now?
That's right.
And so
That's
we need
exactly
to do that
right.
apprenticeship.
But we had a pathway, Ben. People could see room to grow. Yes, there's only one person that sits in the seat at the top, but we were a very flat organisation. And Ben, just before we leave that, I think another area of success I'd like to suggest was that we had a big trading desk. We butted all these different desks up against each other. And so my business partner and I sat in the middle of that big trading desk, and we had a dozen traders around the desk, I suppose. And can I say that success bred success? So somebody around that table would say, I just sold 100 ton of meat to so-and-so in Japan, and the bloke down the other end who hadn't sold anything for a couple of days, gee, I better find a way of getting a trade done here. So not that anybody was we didn't score anybody, or there was no pressure on anybody to do anything, but success bred success, and having everybody sitting around a table where they knew everything that was going on, they could see opportunities and smell opportunities. And it was just a fun environment to be in. I think that people wanted to be there. It was competitive, but fun competitive.
And I love that. And what is it I've heard said over the time is negativity is infectious, but enthusiasm is infectious. So you need to surround yourself with the right people. And I think it was Jim Rohn, the quote was, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I think that's a really important thing for people to remember. If you're in a negative, unhappy, low-performing environment, that's where you're going to end up. Doesn't matter how driven you are. And I think if you can find that environment, it's fantastic. So look, where I was going to segue off to next, Richard, briefly, was you managed to convince McDonald's in the US to use Australian beef in their US stores many years ago. And obviously that was a big thing because now McDonald's is, I think, one of Australia's largest customers worldwide. Nobody had done that before. My question to you is, why the bloody hell do you think they listened to this, as you put it, young bushy from Australia? Why the hell did they even care what you had to say or listen to you?
Well, it was a challenge, Ben, because when I started that process, McDonald's in North America had their slogan was the All-American Burger, which it was. Everything in that burger was American produced. It wasn't an overnight success, Ben. It took me 10 years to achieve that.
Well, that is an overnight success in these days, isn't it? 10 years is 10,000 hours.
It might be. That's right. But a lot of people called me dripping water because I wouldn't let up on it. A lot of people also said, you're kidding yourself. You know, it is the all-American burger. They're not going to buy imported, but I didn't accept that because a lot of McDonald's competitors like Burger King and the likes, they were using imported meat. And I'm sad to say that imported traded at a discount to US domestic meat. That's just the way that it was. US domestic was what we call fresh, whereas imported meat was frozen. And there is no doubt that I hope the Americans won't mind me saying this, but the imported product was a premium product in those days and hopefully still is. A lot of people query as to why America is one of the biggest beef producers in the world. And it's a little bit confusing for some people to think that they would import Aussie beef. Well, Australia sends over 300, or we're sending over 300,000 tonne of beef a year to America. Probably not quite that much today, but the beauty was we send them our lean cow meat, our bull meat, our lean trimmings, and they can blend that with the beef off their feedlots, which is very fatty. So blending the two together gives them the right mix to come up with the fat content in the hamburger that they want to put in their system, Ben. So the fact that the Burger Kings and Jack in the Box were using imported at a lesser price than the US domestic, I believed McDonald's, who has to be competitive, I genuinely believed that it was only a matter of time before they would have to use imported. So I started down that line and I did ask McDonald's head office, but they said nothing to do with us. You've got to talk to our people that they call grinders, and they had 5 grinders, the people who make the hamburger patties. So I started with a company in Chicago and really struck a chord with a fellow there who was a delightful bloke, and we had a wonderful time together for 2 or 3 years. But I eventually realised that although we had a great relationship and he understood where I was coming from, they weren't going to be the ones to take my argument forward. So I looked around for the next grinder, found a company in Philadelphia by the name of Keystone, and connected with a gentleman there by the name of Rick Landis, who was responsible for their protein procurement. His eyes glazed a little when I initially told him what I wanted to achieve, which was sell McDonald's Aussie Beef. So I would go to America probably 3 times every 2 years, Ben, and they had a patty plant down here at Caminia, just west of Brisbane. So he would come down a couple of times a year and we would meet up whenever we could and probably have a boardroom lunch or a formal dinner. And whilst we had a terrific relationship, I had his ear, but it really probably wasn't progressing at the speed that I had hoped for until a funny thing happened one day, Ben. I joined what I thought was a nice golf club in Sydney, and I sent Rick Landis an email and said, Rick, I don't know whether you play golf, but I've just joined a nice club. I'd love to host you for a round one day if that interests you. Well, I got a response to that email 5 minutes later to say, yes, I'll be in Brisbane next week. He said, I could come down on Thursday. What's how we play then? So we did, and of course, he won the golf, Ben. But on the 19th hole, we enjoyed a beer together. And I don't know to this day what happened, but our conversation turned to a personal level where we talked about our families and 3 bags full. And prior to that, I think our conversations had been more formal, more businesslike, more, you know, what's happening in your business? What are the prospects? But we got to a personal level, and as we left the golf club, he said, now, what is it you want to do again? I said, but I just want to sell beef to McDonald's North America. McDonald's are the largest users of protein in the world. And I just saw a huge opportunity both for them and for us. And he said, well, Richard, I'll be at McDonald's head office in Chicago next week. I've got a meeting with the big boss. He said, I'll put your proposal to him because he said, I think it's got legs. He went his merry way. He went to Chicago. He rang me. He said, Richard, we've been given the green light to trial it. He said, could you send me a sample? And I said, Rick, a sample? I said, a sample to me is a carton of frozen meat, but Australia already sends 300,000 tonne a year of this exact same product. I said, what's a carton? He goes, no. He said, you don't understand. He said, I want 40 containers. I said, 40 containers? I said, a sample is normally for free. I said, I can't give you 40. He said, no, commercial deal. I'll pay for it. That's all right. So anyway, I sent him 40 containers of meat and, of course, kept everything crossed that it went all right, as you do. And he rang me 6 or 7 weeks later after it arrived and gone through their factory. And I said, so what's the good news? And he said, a bit of a problem. And I said, no, don't. And what's the problem? He said, 40 containers wasn't really enough volume to get a proper run through our plant. Could you send me 100 containers? So I gladly sent him 100 containers. 6 or 7 weeks later, he rang and said, absolutely perfect. This is just right. Let's go. So I don't know how many thousands of containers of trimming of lean Aussie and Kiwi meat that I sent him over the next couple of years, Ben, but it was an absolute turning point in my business, and it was a bit of a feather in my cap, and it's been terrific for McDonald's. So happy days all round.
Fantastic. If anyone's listening there's like a dozen or 24 golden nuggets I've just heard, but the one that is there for me most stands up is follow up until they reply or die. So you just kept tenaciously following up even when people said you couldn't do it.
Drip, drip, drip. I think, Ben, is the key. But at the same time, you've got to have the right product. You've got to have the right business. You've got to have the right service. And we were able to perform all those duties, and what they saw was what they got, and they loved it, and it all worked at the end of the day. But you've got to be the real deal. I think one of the other important things about me is that probably easy for me to say, but I would like to think that I'm genuine, Ben, and what I say I will do, I do, hopefully plus some. So I think, for any young ones listening, I think that's also important, that you've got to do what you say you will do, and be genuine about it.
Absolutely. That's what I built my business on in financial advice, is we said we will always do what we say we will do, and we will deliver on time always. And if we don't, we'll let you know. And the biggest frustration I had in business was that the people we would do business with, not our customers, our suppliers, wouldn't do their damn job. And I don't know how many times a month I'd be on the phone saying, I'm not asking you to shoot the lights out. I'm not asking you to be a rock star. Just do your damn job. And so many people and so many companies have forgotten that. I think that's a really important point.
And Ben, pay your bills on time. That speaks all languages. I would always try and pay my bills a day before their due by date. And so people just got comfortable doing business with us because they knew the money was okay, which it wasn't with all customers. So, money speaks a lot of languages.
It does. Now, there are a lot of young people listening today. I just know that from the stats. And if they're listening, my guess is that they're pretty driven and want to do better. Now, let's say we could wind it back in time, and you were, say, somewhere between 25 and 40 years of age, and you had a full head of steam. What's one thing you think you would focus on to improve your chance of success?
And there's no doubt that education is paramount today. It wasn't so much in my day because my peers didn't all have university degrees either. But I think today, all your competitors for a job will have a university degree, so you must. When I employed all graduates, I really didn't give a damn whether they'd done economics, ag science, nursing, rocket science. It made no difference to me what they had studied, but the fact that they had a degree, as I said earlier, told me that they had a certain level of intelligence, maturity, they could complete a task, all those things. So I think in commerce today, education is absolutely paramount, and that would be first and foremost. I think then the other thing is you don't necessarily become passionate about what you're doing overnight. You've got to give a job time for you to get to know it and you to get your head around how it all operates. But I probably use the word passion too often and too freely. But, as I heard somebody on one of your podcasts say the other day, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And I really, truly believe that. There was rarely a day where I struggled to get to the office because it was just a fun place to be. And I encourage anybody to loosen up a little bit, make the workplace an enjoyable place. Everybody had to pull their weight and get the job done. Don't worry. Plenty of people did 12-hour days when it was on, Ben, but somehow it was still fun. We celebrated birthdays. We recognised when, babies were born, and so it wasn't just the staff. It was, the birthdays of the kids and all those sort of things. We were respectful but genuine about it, and it was, I'm sure all my team would say that it was a wonderful place to be, and I think that was important. I repeat, you have to be genuine. As I say, I worked on the external things in our business, like our banks. Apart from our staff, our bankers were the most important part of our business, because without their money, I didn't have a business. And we had 3 banks, and I recommend people who have got a business that's sizable enough to have multi-banks. The banks enjoyed having other bankers there that they could tick-a-tack with as well, and it gave me a little bit of leverage, I think, to make sure that every organisation, banks included, have their strong points and their weak points, and so we gave certain business to banks that were stronger in areas than others. But I can't believe in this day and age how people disregard their bankers or don't like their bankers, don't trust their bankers, don't want to bring your bank into your business. They're a big part of your business, in my opinion. Let them know what you're doing in your business and how you're running it, and that keeps you on your toes a little bit as well, I think, Ben, to make sure that you're doing the right thing by your bankers and by your business, because they had the confidence in us that we knew where our money was. Ben, as I said to my banks, before the bank has lost 1 cent of their money, I've lost all of mine, because I had to put up all the guarantees under the sun to get the facilities that we had. So, as I said, before I've lost one of yours, I've lost all of mine, and I certainly don't intend losing any of mine. So that stood our business in good stead, because we had the funds to do what we wanted to do. But yeah, lots of takeaways, I think, Ben. I repeat, I didn't have any of that formal training. I sort of learnt it on the go and absorbed it from others as we went along, and, tried to keep an open mind as to how best to handle all these different situations, Ben.
That's some great advice. And if I can just reflect a little bit, listening to you today, is one of the things I think anyone can do, whether they be younger or older, the one key thing they could do is learn to become trustworthy, which I can hear in your dealings in business. You became a very trustworthy person. So people that worked for you, people that did business with you, your suppliers trusted you implicitly. And I think people make the mistake of thinking you build trust by being honest. But I've come to realize over the years that that's not right. Honesty is part of the solution, but it's not the total solution. And I didn't realize it until after I'd sold my business that we used to work on a number of key things. And I think there's 3 areas to build trust. One is sincerity. So being really sincere in whatever activities you're doing, that you will do your best, you will do what's right, you will be honest and honourable in your dealings with everyone. I think competence, if you are in a position where you are doing whatever you're doing, you become competent and reliable in that competency. So again, within your business, it sounded to me like you promised a lot to McDonald's, you promised a lot to them, but then you backed it up with competence. You did what you say you do. And the last one is reliability. Be reliable. And I see that so often in people these days, is they think they trade on the fact that they're nice. And I'd see that in financial advice. I'd see new clients would come to me and they'd say, Ben, I had a financial advisor and he was such a nice guy and he was really honest, but they left him. And I'm like, why did you leave him? And it was because he was unreliable, or he wasn't quite competent, or she wasn't quite competent. So I think for any people out there today, work really hard on being trustworthy. And to do that, you need to be reliable, you need to be competent, and you need to be sincere and honest. And I think if you work on those 3 things, I can see that runs right through your story. Richard?
Indeed, it does, Ben. It was a great focus. And pretty easy to do, to be perfectly honest. So long as you've got the money, so long as you've got the financial backing, it's pretty easy to stand behind your word. But not everybody does it, unfortunately, but it's absolutely paramount for mine.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, we've got the last question, which I like to ask everyone, and I've given you this question to have a think about because I knew it'd be an interesting one.
And I've thought long and hard, Ben.
I can tell. Now, what's your definition of true wealth?
Ben, I have pondered this long and hard, and it's not a simple answer, but I'll give it a go if I may. In a nutshell, I will say to be happy and contented. I think money is most important to those who don't have any. That's where money is really a crux, and I completely understand that. And Ben, I've been there. I've well and truly been there and had no money and wasn't quite sure how I'd pay next week's rent personally as a young fella. And that's a real quandary, and I will never forget that feeling and being in that position. But you find a way to get through these things. There's a few one-liners, Ben. I was going to say, my true wealth will be determined by the number of people that turn up at my funeral, but I won't know that. And a little bit of that will depend on what age I am when I go and whether there's still a few left around me. But look, friends and acquaintances are terribly important to me, Ben. I love my life, and we do that with friends. The one thing that's more important than that is my wife and my family. We're all very close, not only my children, but my siblings. Last week, I've got two brothers and a sister, and just last week, the four of us went away and with our partners, went away and had a few days together, which we try and do each year. We're very close as a family, which sadly not enough families are because of succession or other things that happen in life, which I think is really, really sad. But yes, to be true wealth to me, Ben, is happiness and contentment, which flows on to family and all those things. Money is important, but it's certainly not the main goal. You've got to have enough to be able to live life the way you want to, but we cut our cloth accordingly. It's something that I'll continue to contemplate, Ben, if I may. I hope that answer is sufficient for you, but it's important for us all to ponder, I think, on what true wealth really is and what it means to us.
Yeah, it is a very important question, and there's usually a solid theme in most people's response, but I could totally concur with what you're saying. And I think if as we progress through life, we remember that money is important. We must be sensible. We must build our wealth. We must protect it. We must transition it successfully. But it's what we do with that money that's more important. And I think choice is, for me, the number one thing that money and wealth provide. So, no, that was a great response. And I can see you've got one last little thing.
Oh, no, I'm sure the answer to that question would change multiple times through life. You know, yes. when you've got a big mortgage and you don't know how you're going to pay your monthly fees, wealth is a very different thing to it is when you've got a family, or to when you're retired and you're more comfortable and you've got the bills off your back and then you can. So that is a moving feast, but it's a really interesting question, and thanks for posing it.
No, that's my pleasure, and thanks for joining us today. As I said, there was dozens of gold nuggets in there I could hear. So if anyone's listening to this, make sure you share it around. The younger generation, there's a lot you can learn for people that have, trodden the path that you'll be wanting to tread yourself. So thank you very much for joining us today.
And don't be afraid to ask, because people are only too happy to share.
Well, that was a cracker of an episode, and I really enjoyed a conversation with Richard. Now, I did another podcast episode with Richard, which was the 3R Fireside Chat, where he was part of a panel, and that got some really great reviews and some really great feedback. So if you want to hear more from Richard, a bit more about industry issues, go back and check out that episode. Now, if you enjoyed this episode and know anyone that would benefit from listening, it'd help us out a lot if you shared the wealth and wisdom and forward on the episode to them. A review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts will also make a huge difference to us. And that's all for this week, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time.